Thanks for tuning in. Hope you're having a good week. Just wanted to make this week's video about Thanksgiving since it's coming up, obviously, on Thursday. Just want to talk a little bit about the history and, why it proves that communism just always fails. So, communism in a sense, really, it's never really worked. I can only think of like one kind of example where it's semi-worked, and that would be the Amish. That could be the only example I could really think of. But, their supporters always just say, well, it's never been exactly implemented right, or, the right people have never really used it. But I just want to, point out again that the pilgrims tried it, and it's just a good reminder that, that it just doesn't really work. Even with the right people that are good Christians who are, very caring and helpful of others, couldn't even make it, effective. So, the Pilgrims, they landed at Plymouth Rock in, 1620. They left England kind of aiming for Virginia, but they actually were blown off course, and, they landed in the Cape Cod kind of area of Massachusetts. They left on their own and just wanted to establish their own form of government and their own economy. Where they landed, it was actually already tilled and prepared. So, the land was being, kind of leveled. There was a hill where they could, set up a good defensive position in case, anyone attacked them, like natives. But trees were already cut down. The grounds were kind of prepared for crops. But there was no one there, just skeletons. Basically, there was a tribe called the Patuxet, I think, that lived there, and they all died off because of disease. There was around 2,000 of them that kind of lived there, according to Squanto. I'm sure you've heard of that name before, but Squanto was the translator that basically delegated between the native population in the area and the Europeans, the English. He actually was kidnapped years before and lived in Malaga, lived in London, and then he went back to his tribe and found everyone gone. So he was the only surviving one, this Squanto guy. But anyway, getting off track. So, by this time, around 90% of the native population was completely decimated by disease. And it's also just another thing I always point out too, people don't really, they always say we stole, native land. Sure, there was instances where that happened, but a lot of the land was just being unused because they were gone. They were dying off. So, there's other, explanations too that people don't really realize about. So, if you think about the Choctaw, for example, in Alabama, they would always trade deer furs, so white-tailed deer furs. Basically, they would trade it for alcohol, and over time, the competing tribes in the area killed off the white-tailed deer population because they wanted to trade it for alcohol, and they got too addicted to it, and then they sold their land to the banks because they had nothing else to trade for the alcohol. So there's ways that it happens. Not we just took the land from them. It's just, they gave it to us because they had nothing else to trade. So, I'm more in the camp of just saying, look, human history is so complicated. There's always been winners and losers in wars. Think about the Greeks in the Anatolia. You have Byzantium, that's now Istanbul. You don't see us bombing Istanbul because we want it back, or we want West Anatolia back. There's so many instances in history of where that happens, and the lines are drawn how they're drawn. So, and not to mention, I'd rather put my chips behind a civilization that's going to get us on the moon or get us to Mars versus Native Americans who basically were set way behind. There's a great book, if you haven't read it yet. It's by Jared Diamond, called Guns, Germs, and Steel. The basic pretense is, you have domesticated animals in Eurasia, and also, you had the alpaca in the Incan area in Peru, but that's the only example. Then in Australia, you had marsupial kind of cattle that they killed off. So, in the areas where you don't have domesticated animals, like Africa, Australia, North America, they were unable to create any kind of urban center. And then when you don't have an urban center, you don't have stratified jobs. You don't have doctors, physicians, lawyers, scientists, things of that nature. And when you are able to focus and split up, all the jobs because of domesticated animals and irrigation and agriculture, you can start, creating things like, steel swords or like, medicines. And that's why the Native Americans were so behind, because they weren't able to create large population centers. So anyway, I mean, you could think of like Tenochtitlan. That was like the only one in the Aztec area. Then you have Cahokia too, which is on modern day St. Louis. But they don't really know why they died off though exactly. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic. But let's just go back to the Mayflower Compact. So Mayflower Compact, it was basically what established the form of government in for the Pilgrims. Basically, it was the kind of the first constitution in America. It was established with basically a constitutional republic, but with the economy being basically communist. So, I just would like to also point out, thinking about constitutions, after the Constitutional Convention in 1789, that got rid of the Articles of Confederation. So George Washington technically wasn't the first president of the United States. It was actually John Hanson. John Hanson was the first president of the United States under the Articles of Confederation. So, little fun fact there. But anyway, the Mayflower Compact basically, created this company colony, Plymouth Plantation, which was operated under bylaws established by the Virginia Company of London. So these bylaws set up a communal system for the Pilgrims, all which, capital and profits for the first 7 years would remain in the common stock. So, there was no such thing as private property. It was all property, and all business related activities actually belonged to the collective and to the common stock, so of this company. So none of it belonged to individuals or just individual families. So, during the 7 years, all the profits and benefits, are got by trade. This is all quotes from William Bradford. You could read his diary. It's online. But I had to read it back in college, so this is why I remember all this stuff. But I had to, go back and reread. But basically, and I quote, so all profits and benefits that are got by trade, traffic, trucking, working, fishing, and any other means, any person or persons remain still in the common stock. So everyone was to have their meat and apparel and all provision, all the stock and goods goes to this common stock. So after the end of the 7 years in this utopian society, it would be split, equally divided betwixt the adventurers and the planters. So, it sounded, as it does today, idealistic, like this is going to work out so well. Everyone's getting allotted the exact same equality, bro. Like that's what it just seemed like, it's going to work out perfectly. But, it'd be a share and share alike, everyone putting aside their own aspirations and, for the going against the accumulation of wealth and property only, in order to selflessly devote all of their energies and talents basically to the common good. But this was really Marxism before Marx. So like all, socialistic and, communistic societies, it just always leads to a collapse. So, William Bradford wrote in his book, well, it was like his diary, he just described it as a complete failure. He made it clear that it wasn't the fault of the people, but in the system. And I quote, basically, this is what he said. It said, the failure of that experiment of communal service, which was tried for several years and by good and honest men, proves the emptiness of the theory of Plato and other ancients, applauded by some in later times, that the taking away of private property and the possession of it in community by a commonwealth would make it a state of happy and flourishing, as if they are wiser than God. So communism, in other words, it did not work as intended. It sounded as good as it was on the outside, but in actual implementation proved to lead to starvation. So the result was predictable. Bradford continued. So community property was found to breed much confusion and discontent and retard much employment, which would have been to the general benefit. For the young men who were most able and fit for the service objected to being forced to spend their time and strength in working for other men's wives and children without any recompense. So he continued more. The strong men or the resourceful man had no more share of food, clothes, etc. than the weak man, who was not able to do a quarter the other could. This was thought injustice. The aged and graver men, who were ranked and equalized in labor, food, clothes, etc., with the humbler and younger ones, thought it some indignity and disrespect to them. As for the men's wives, who were obliged to do service for other men, such as cooking, washing their clothes, they considered it a kind of slavery, and many husbands would not brook it. So basically, you have men that were working harder than others. They didn't feel rewarded for it, so it's not a meritocracy here. And then you have women who are just not enjoying cleaning the undergarments of others. So like I'm sure Sally next door just really enjoyed cleaning up the shit stains or the skid marks because hooray for communism. Great idea there, guys. You know, Bradford even pointed out that if you're looking for the right people to implement communism with, these were the right people. They were good Christians willing to help others, but even they were getting pissed off. So he continued on. So if all were to share alike, all were to do alike, then all were on the equality throughout, and one was as good as the other. And so, if it did not actually abolish those very relations which God himself has set among men, it did at least greatly diminish the mutual respect that it is so important should be preserved amongst them. Let none argue that due to this human failing rather than this communistic plan in life itself. So this communistic plan of life was an abysmal failure. What would replace it? So he did find something. It was capitalism. So God in his wisdom saw another plan of life was fitter for them. So they began to consider how to raise more corn and obtain a better crop than they had done, so that they might not continue to endure the misery of want. At length, after much debate, the governor, with the advice of the chief among them, allowed each man to plant corn for his own household. So every family was assigned a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number, and this was very successful. It made all hands very industrious, so that much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other device, save him a great deal of trouble, and gave far better satisfaction. The women now went willing into the field and took their little ones with them to plant corn, while before they would allege weakness and inability, and to have compelled them to be thought great tyranny and oppression. So in other words, they would just say like, oh, I'm sick today, I can't work. And then they would also steal from the granary. They would feel that they were going to get allocated with their grain anyway. So now you have basically merit being established. Who would have thought a system based off, real hard work works better than a system that rewards the lazy and weak? Jealousy was created under the commune system, where older men felt that they were looked down upon for not pulling their weight, and younger men felt like they were being abused and taken advantage of. Same with women. They thought that they were literally had become slaves. So on this Thanksgiving, let's just appreciate our pilgrim forefathers and, their triumph over communism. That's really what it's all about. And just realizing that capitalism is really the best economic and political system that we've derived from ourselves and, throughout history. So, I just really want you guys to realize when you're eating at Thanksgiving this week, just think about the pilgrims and how capitalism rules. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.